actually, so that's gonna have to load a little bit. All right. Okay. Hamidaka Fit Dayaya Hipi. Hello, friends and relatives. Actually, let's see. I have to go like this. 1 second. All right, now we're admitting everyone. Okay. Now we can start. Hamidaka fi dayaya hifi. Hello, friends and relatives. Welcome to Building Relations with the Plant Nation, featuring Dakota spiritual leader and healer Galen Drapeau and his daughter, native filmmaker and owner of JD Creations, Jordan Marie Drapeau. My name is Mishaila Bowman, and I will be your webinar host today, along with my amazing coworker, Keeli Siyaka. A little bit about myself. I am our communications and events coordinator here at Lower Phelan Creek Project. I'm Sisituan Kawakpetuan Dakota from the Wana and Thompson Teoshpaye out in Sistine. And on my dad's side of the family, we are second generation Scottish peoples. I always love to highlight both parts of myself. We are super excited about this webinar today and feel so incredibly humbled to hear from both Galen and Jordan. But before we hand it off to them, I'm going to have my coworker Keeli introduce herself and a little bit about the work we do here at Lower Phelan Creek Project.
Damia Yemashke, Hamitakiapi, Ishkiamachiakapi, Keeli Siyaka Makiapi, Mijada Makota, Sisituanga Wachbetua, Hemataha, environmental justice educator and organizer Hemacha. So good evening, my relatives. Good to see you all. My name is Keeli Siyaka. I'm Dakota from the Sistine Waktanoyate, Williams and Renville, Teoshpayes. I'm the environmental justice educator and organizer here with Lower Phelan Creek Project, and I am very excited to be part of this webinar, which is part of our work. So Tingaya Hipi, welcome everyone. This webinar is one of many that we've had and one of many in hopefully in a series that'll continue about how we can be good relatives to the Najim Pioyate or our plant nations. This is part of our work as a native-led environmental conservation nonprofit, mainly focused on the east side of St. Paul, and centered around cultural connections and healing in our communities, but also a bit in environmental education. We also do work in urban conservation and restoration, particularly out of the Dakota sacred site Wakantipi, also known as Bruce Vento Nature Sanctuary today. This is a story, the story of Wakantipi is one that's mired in a lot of change and transformation. It started out being, along a sacred site located along the Mississippi River in St. Paul, Wakpatanka. And the story goes that there were many Dakota communities all along the river. It was a very beautiful space that we could be in community, that we could fish and live from off the land, permanent and seasonal encampments of our people. And unfortunately, after Dakota exile, a lot of these lands were transformed. A lot of them were taken over by industry. The most beautiful sites were unfortunately the first to be desecrated, and Wakantipi was one of those. But in just a couple short decades, beginning in the late 1990s, our communities came together, and a lot of improvements have been made, and in a lot of ways, this ecosystem has bounced back. And every season, every month that I've been working here, new plant and animal relatives return to the site. And it really serves as an example for our communities of what can happen when we care for our green spaces and reconnect to those spaces. So that's part of our mission at Lower Phelan Creek Project, to engage people to honor and care for our natural spaces and the sacred sites and cultural value within them. Yes.
Thank you so much for grounding us in our work, Keeli. I'm just going to talk briefly about how this webinar came to be. This webinar is a part of what we call our Clean and Green Earth Month campaign. So if you don't know, the month of April is Earth Month. But as Native folks, we know every day, every month, every year is Earth Month. It is our responsibility to care for Unchimaka in the best way that we can. She gives so much to us, and we really have to work towards caring for her and giving all of that care back. So this webinar is one of the many ways that we have been able to offer folks a way to engage in environmental justice and honoring Indigenous leadership and land stewardship for Earth Month. We have an event this Saturday. So after this webinar, if you are local to the Twin Cities, we really encourage you to come out to Wakantipi and help us at our cleanup that we're going to be having this Saturday. Last year, we had over 140 people come out, and we picked up 2,000 pounds of trash from our sacred site. So we are also in the middle of this campaign, hoping to raise funds to continue this good work to power Indigenous land stewardship. We are about 35% of the way to our goal. So I'm just going to put a link into the chat where you can tune in, contribute if you haven't already, but also just so you have that information for our cleanup on Saturday. I'm so excited to have Galen and Jordan here, because we really wanted to start this webinar because we noticed that when COVID hit, a lot of our relatives wanted to return to our plant medicines, or really focus on having our plant medicines heal a lot of the sicknesses that we're experiencing and seeing around us. But before we talk about plant medicines, highlighting what plants have what gifts, we really wanted to have a webinar to ground us in some teachings and understandings of what it means to be a good relative to the plant nation. And our executive director, Maggie Lorenz, thought of a really great idea to reach out to Galen and Jordan to come in and share their knowledge and teachings as really powerful members of the community that hold this knowledge really close and dear to their hearts. So before we hand it off to them, we have a few housekeeping items that we want to share, and those will be on the next slide.
So tonight, our webinar guidelines are as follows. First, please keep your mic on mute throughout the webinar to avoid any sort of feedback and interruptions that might come up. Two, if you are able, turn your camera on. We love to see who we're in the room with, who we're in the virtual Zoom space with. And then third, wa'ohada, respect. Please have respect for the teachings that are shared, stories, and our storytellers tonight. We ask, if you are non-native, to really sit with the knowledge that is given and reflect. If you have a question, think about it first, if it's appropriate. But please do, if you have questions, put them into the chat. We will have a Q&A, try to reserve time for a Q&A session at the end. But with that, I will let Galen and Jordan introduce themselves and talk about how they are building relationships with our plant relatives.
Hello, my name is Galen Drapeau. My Dakota name is Tatanka Itancha, which means buffalo leader. I'm from the Yankton Sioux tribe, and I'm a spiritual leader, medicine person, you know, and I utilize a lot of medicinal herbs that grow here on Turtle Island. I'm not just limited to my reservation. I travel all over Turtle Island to gather medicines, and I live in a place that we call Bade Hunke, end of the lake, or the township is called Lake Andes. And here on the Yankton Res, the Hunknwa Reservation, and I travel and do ceremonies, and we have a Sundance on our reservation here, and we also just recently started a nonprofit organization. It's called Tatanko Ayate Preservation Society, and TOPS for short. And we're in the process of finalizing everything to the organization, and we want to archive our medicines and share the uses of our medicines, you know, not just with the eating or the healing part, but also the nourishment that comes from the wild medicines that grow on our reservations on Turtle Island, and as well as preserving all of our culture, our ceremonies, our traditions. And we want to archive everything that is possible to archive, songs, all of it, you know. And so this is who I am, and want to just share that much and say good evening to everyone.
Amidakiapi, Chente washe nape chuzapi, hoye washe makiapi, bade I hunke edwati. Good evening, everyone. My name's Jordan Drapeau. My Dakota name is Pretty Voice Woman. And I too am from Lake Andes, South Dakota, I hunkdoa Nakota. And you know, I'm the founder and owner of JD Creations. You know, I'm an artist that specializes in porcupine quill work. And you know, I grew up helping my family, or my ate, my dad. And you know, he's kind of mentoring me, and you know, because I'm learning too. I'm 27 years old, and you know, it's really important to know our kajuta, you know, that comes from Mother Earth. So, you know, I've been learning probably like the last 7 years. I've really, you know, taken interest in, you know, following my dad and helping him dig medicines, learning the protocols. And he mentioned that we started our nonprofit organization, and I'm the treasurer of our nonprofit. You know, I have a degree in business management and a minor in accounting. So, you know, I try to help my dad the best way that I know how. You know, that's pretty much I want to share about myself. So thank you. You want to start first? Go, Deb.
Me or you?
Yeah, you.
All right. Okay. The plant that I'm going to share with you today is called the English term is the compass plant, and they kind of say that it's a toxic plant and can bring harm to you. But if you understand it and know about it, you know, there are medicinal ways to utilize it to help one with, you know, good health, And first of all, we call it chanchishina, and it's kind of like a little tree, and but you don't see the base of it because it grows in Mother Earth. And when you dig this medicine, you need to probably begin early in the morning, because it'll take you probably I would say 4 to 6 hours to dig the entire plant. And the way that I was taught through our medicine peoples and through our ceremonial way of life is that you don't just dig so far and take half of the plant. You're supposed to take it and acquire the entirety of the plant. If you're utilizing the root, then you dig all the way down. And when you dig these plants like this, it was shared with me through ceremony that that I'm supposed to dig the root in a half moon shape, and then I follow the root down as it begins to go into Mother Earth, and you try not to break the root. And another thing is that when I dig plants, that I have to have them dug before the sun hits straight up above Mother Earth. And so I have that morning time till when the sun is straight up to gather the medicines. And these are disciplines that were shared with me and how to gather them. And they say that the plant is sleeping until the sun is straight up. And so this is why we gather them before high noon, what they would call it in regards to the sun. And when this plant is fully in bloom, it kind of looks like this, the flower, and the leaves will look a lot like this. And the plant as a whole then will look like this, and it's indigenous to the Midwest, the northern plains, the central plains. And the story that I have about this plant, this medicine, is that long ago, there was a warrior that was out, and he was hunting, for his family, for his tribe, and he was alone, and he was following a tachja, a deer, and in that process of him hunting, he was being that provider, that individual that was going to bring home food for his family. And while he was out, he kind of got lost in his whereabouts, in his environment, and he was tracking a pretty good size deer buck, and so he wasn't paying attention to himself, and while he was in the process of following this deer, this tafja, he was also being hunted. and they said that he was being hunted by a large mountain lion, a large cat, Igmutanka. And so by the time that he noticed that he was being hunted, it was kind of a little bit too late, and he was attacked by the Igmutanka. And so, he did his best to defend himself and help himself, but he acquired some wounds that were, in a place where he was bleeding a lot profusely, and he began to lose, his consciousness and everything, and he was kind of down in a ravine, and when he lost all of the blood and everything, he became disoriented. And so he began to maneuver, and crawl. He couldn't walk, and so he was crawling, and he was looking around at his environment, and he didn't recognize any place that he was at. And so he was lost. And so as he began to crawl, from that ravine, and he started to maneuver up towards the top, he's seen this plant, this Chanchishina plant, and on a traditional way, the children, they used to take the sap from this plant, from this Chanchishina plant here. They would take the sap and they would chew on it. And it's kind of like a bubble gum, I guess. And so, they would chew on that sap, and the individual, this young warrior, noticed that there was some Chanchishina plants around. So he made his way over to the plant, and he grabbed some of the sap that was there, and he began to chew on that sap, and where the deep cuts were from the claws of the Igmutanka. After chewing on it a little bit, he kind of put that sap over them deep gouges that were on his chest and close to his throat, and to stop the bleeding. And again, he was disoriented. And so he still didn't recognize where he was at or his environment. And so he began to, think and pray and to try and help himself. And then that plant, was there to help him. And the plant then guided him in the direction in which he needed to travel. And because when you look at these, this Chanchishina plant, when you see it out in the wild, if you look at the leaves, for the most part, the majority of these plants, the leaves will run north and south. And so, that's why the English term, they call it a compass plant, because if you're lost, then you could look at the leaves of this medicine here, and it'll tell you which way is north and which way is south, and then you can adjust your bearings to find out where you are. So this plant helped him, and he crawled, and he got back to his Shunkawaka, his horse, and he was able to pull himself up. And the horse, then took him back to his teepee, back to his camp, and his family then took care of him, and so This is a story that I heard about this plant, that how it saved the young warrior's life and allowed him to live, and he went on to live many, many more years after that. But from that time forward, this young warrior, he prayed and he began to understand and learn as much as possible about this plant, chanchishina. And, you know, the plant can grow from anywhere from 6 to 12 feet tall when it's in full bloom, and it takes a few years for it to mature. It's not like a lot of plants that they will mature in one season, one growing season. And this plant here will continue to regrow and regrow with the same root system, and it will grow to when it's mature, after several years. And so it's kind of like us human beings, like us two-leggeds. We take time for us to go through our lifetime, from babies to young adults or young children, up to young adults, and then to elderly stage. And so this plant is very special to our people. And this is just a part of the root, and then the plant itself, the leaves and the flower stem off of the top here, and then it grows down. And when you dig the plant, like I said, it's going to take several hours to dig it, and it's going to be anywhere from probably 5 to maybe 8 feet deep into the ground. And then when you get the root out, and then you prepare it, and you take care of it, and it dries out, then that 8-foot root, 6 to 8 foot root that you have in your hand will then shorten all the way up to maybe 2 to 4 feet. And so it's important. Here's a picture. My daughter has a picture.
That's me and one of my sisters digging. We were probably like 5 feet down at that point.
And so we started that in the morning, and we were probably digging maybe another hour or so. That took us probably about there was 4 of us digging that plant, so it probably took us maybe 4 hours, maybe 4.5 hours to dig. If you dig it by yourself, it's going to take you 7-8 hours. And so this root that I'm holding is the root that we dug.
This day, that's the one he has.
And we were fortunate that we had 2 of the chanchishina plants growing side by side. So we took both roots. And whenever you go and dig medicines, you always need to take tobacco. And there's another picture of the medicines by one another. And you always take tobacco, and you pray. You pray when you're going to pick a medicine, and you pray with a medicine, and you give thanks, for it giving its life so that we could have good health. And then you put your tobacco down on the plant, and the plant that you pick to put your tobacco down, then you move from that plant and go to another plant, and then that's the plant that you take. So where you put your tobacco down with these medicines, you don't take that plant, because you want that plant to produce more medicines, more of that health that it's going to give us, and then you take from elsewhere. And so these are traditional teachings that was shared with me by different spiritual medicine peoples, and I'm thankful to all of them, and the ones that I learned from are all gone now. That they have left us and moved on to the spirit world. And like my father, Galen Senior, and different ones, different medicine people I grew up learning from. Just a couple to name, as my adopted father, Leonard Crow-Dog, and Grandpa Stanley Looking Horse, and Fool's Crow, and different medicine men like that, Robert Steed. And so I've taken the understandings and the teachings that I've learned from all of these spiritual leaders, and I live by what they have shared with me. And again, this plant here, you could take it and you can grind it up, and you can I use it a lot of times and put it on the stones inside the sacred sweat, and a lot of times it will help your sinus to open up if you have like a sinus infection, or if you have a fever that just won't break. You can take it and grind up the root, and put it into some boiling water. And whenever I make medicines, I always pray with the medicine when I'm preparing it. And so I'll pray with the medicine and ask that medicine to help. And then you boil it, and when you drink it, it'll help your fevers to break. Also, you could take the root and make tea with it. It'll not only help your fever to break, but it'll also help you with like colds or the flu, or if you have pain in your one of your extremities, your arms or your legs, it'll also take away the pain that you're having at that time. And then we also call it, like headache medicine. You could take this and you could burn the root, and then the smoke that comes off of it, then you can breathe it in, and it really burns your sinus, and it really creates a really hard feeling inside of your head. But after maybe 4 or 5 breathe-ins through your nose, your headache will be gone within a matter of seconds. And so this medicine is very, very important and very sacred. Some people might even call it buffalo root, and so, but I grew up knowing it as chanchishina, and I've heard others call it tatanka pejuta, buffalo medicine or buffalo root, and so, I wanted to share this here today, this medicine, and share the story that I learned, about this medicine. And you could even take the petals from the flower. You could take the petals from the flower and you can grind them up and use them for a dye to make yellow dye, you know. And again, the children used to take the sap. They would go and break off some of the parts of the leaves and then wait for a day or two, and then sap would come out of it, and the children would take it and they would chew on that sap like gum. And so, you know, there's a lot of parts to this medicine, and I just wanted to take the time, and I'm truly honored and thankful, you know, to the relations for asking us to be on the webinar today, and you know, for allowing us to share some of the medicines that we're going to be that myself and my daughter are talking about today. And I'm thankful to, you know, the relatives for what they do, you know, and trying to help preserve and keep alive, you know, not only the medicines, but our sacred sites, you know, and because those sacred sites are what's going to help us into the future, you know, the future generations. And it's important for us as individuals to move forward and live in the best way that we know how, with our sacred way of life, you know, the ceremony, the pipe, you know, our traditional way of life that we walk with. And you know, when we're in the right frame of mind, mentally, spiritually, physically, and emotionally, you know, we're gonna go a long ways because of these medicines like this chanchishina, or the other medicines that other relatives have talked about over the past years. And just want to say thank you.
All right, I guess it's my turn. So I the plant that I wanted to talk about was Dakota Eapi, which is the language medicine. And I only learned it in a spiritual setting, so I don't know the English term of what it is, like in I just know it as Dakota Eapi. And there's some different pictures, and so I dug this plant probably two times, and like my dad was saying, you gotta start early in the morning, and it took us probably about 3 or 4 hours to dig it. And he was talking about how most plants grow like north to south, while this one grows east to west, I guess. But I don't know, it doesn't grow, it grows down, but it grows like sideways. So like where we picked this medicine was down by our Sundance grounds here on the Yankton Sioux Reservation, and we were kind of off of a cliffside a little bit, but there was like all these plants across like that, and when we were digging it, they all started to connect to each other. So it was just like on the cliffside, or the like the mount or the hillside, I guess, these plants were just connecting to each other. I don't know, it was like really beautiful thing, and it was just like growing down like that. And the reason why I picked this medicine, because we wanted to share like a story a little bit, but my story isn't like a creation story or nothing. It was just from my own personal experience. And as a Ihunktoa Nakota Wia, I'm a sun dancer. I've sun danced many years, and I went up on the hill and fasted as well, many years actually. I've been fasting since I've been 12 years old, or since I was 12 years old, and I'm 27, so I've been practicing our way of life for many years. And in 2015, when I fasted on the hill, after coming down, they wanted me to start to learn my language. So that's how this medicine came to me. And so later, after I came down on tree day, our sun dances in June, and that's when this plant is ready to pick, is starting in June and into July, I believe. And so they wanted me to learn my language, so this medicine came to me as I was fasting on the hill. And how you utilize it is you take a piece off, you chew it up, and you make it into a paste, and you put it on all your senses. So you put it in your tear ducts, you put it in your nostrils, you put it in your mouth on the sides, you put it in your ears, you put it on top of your head, and then you rub it in your hands. These are all, so we can be woken, so we can learn the language, and it goes through all of our senses, because it takes every sense to learn a language and stuff. And so when I first did that, pick this, and I did all of that, and you burn it and you smell it too. I kid you not, my dad was talking or praying in the language, and I could understand him like he was talking in English. And I never experienced that ever in my life. As I've grown up, just certain words, and you pick up as you go, but I've never, he was praying, and I could just understand every single word he was saying. And it sounded like English. And so they say that if you could utilize this like every single day and stuff, but if you want to learn your language and stuff, if you learn a word every single day for a whole year, then you're in the right direction of, you could fully understand your language and learn your language. So I don't know, I just thought that was really cool. And I feel like I probably, if I took it more serious, I could speak, really good enough, but I didn't listen. But, that was just my own personal experience about learning about medicines, and, making sure that you do the right protocols, putting your tobacco down on the plant, and making sure that you go and pick a different plant. But, that's what little I wanted to share about this plant. And I don't know if there's any more uses for this plant, but maybe my dad could elaborate on this, on Dakota Eapi. Dad.
Oh. Okay. This medicine was shared with us probably back in the early 80s. And you know, I kind of had a similar experience with it, you know, and how it was described to be used. But at the same time, too, you know, I remember my father, you know, sharing with me that, you know, you could take the medicine, the root, and you can kind of cut it into real small pieces, you know, and make it a part of your everyday life, and put it into, use it like what do you call it, a herb, you know, for soup, and you know, ingest it, you know, ingest it and make it a part of you. And when you do it like that, also, besides you know, putting it in your eyes, the corners of your eyes and your nose and the corners of your mouth and your ears and on top of your head and in the palm of your hand, you know, if you ingest it and eat it, then, you know, it becomes a part of you. And then as time goes on, you know, you're going to beginning to understand and learn that language that is important to us. And unfortunately, I don't know the English name for the plant other than Dakota Ayapi Pejuta, you know, the language medicine plant. And you know, just what was shared with me growing up, you know, I try to share that with my daughter, you know, and helping her, you know, with the language, you know. And the language isn't hard to learn, but you know, if you utilize the medicine, it'll make it that much more easier, you know, to help our peoples with that language that is very important. You know, our people, they say that um, you know, we're always saying that we're a sovereign nation, you know, that we're sovereign peoples. But what's important to sovereignty is the language. And if you don't have the language, then you're not a sovereign. And so, you know, I'm thankful that my daughter wanted to share this medicine today, and and express herself and her story with the understanding of this medicine, you know. And um, I want to. Somebody said wild prairie aster is the name of that medicine. So, you know, this is how we were taught to use it. And again, one of the teachings that I want to share is that a lot of people use a lot of different medicines in different ways. And so uh, you could take and use chanchishina in a totally different way, you know, if you go and pray with it. And so, like all the medicines that I've learned, I take up on a hill when I go and fast and I pray with them. Or actually, while I'm up on a hill, a medicine will come to me. And then the spirit and that medicine will talk to me and tell me how to use it. And so I could use a medicine for cancer, but somebody else could use the same medicine for diabetes. But it's how that medicine is earned. And so, you know, you just don't go and say, oh, sage. I can use sage for, you know, for a cold or some, or, you know, like that. You have to, on a spiritual level, earn the right to utilize these medicines. And these are things that were shared with me that were taught to me, by all of the medicine peoples that I've ever known throughout my life. And I've shared some some of those medicine peoples, their names, and I traveled, all over Indian country and learned from a lot of medicine peoples. And so my father and as well as others, they utilize, the medicines in different ways, because they earned them that way by going up on a hill and fasting. And so, again, I want to express that with all of you relations. And I want to say that much, about medicines. And, again, like I said, these medicines are used in different ways. And I want to express that to all of you relatives. And again, I'm truly honored and thankful that you invited myself and my daughter to share today with each and every one of you.
Oh, sorry, Keely.
Thank you for those teachings and sharing those stories and lessons with us. So Ehana, a long time ago, when I know we shared stories, and especially with children, you'd ask them to recite what they heard back to you. So I'm gonna randomly pick someone from the audience and want you to tell me the story of the compass plant. Okay. Just kidding. No, we're not gonna do that. What I'm gonna do is spend a little bit of time sharing some of the environmental justice issues and kind of things that come up with building connections to our Najim Pioyate, or the plant nation, especially in urban environments. So I come from a medicine family, but I didn't grow up on my reservation for the most part. I kind of was separated from some of the knowledge and teachings that I know my elders had. And unfortunately, living in an urban environment comes with some additional challenges. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the kind of environmental justice issues related to this. And also, it's Earth Month, like Mishaila mentioned, for Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. Earth Month is every month. Earth Month is Apetu Yohi every day. But this is a time for us as a society too, since the first Earth Day, Earth Month in the 1970s, it's a chance for us to reflect on how far we've come as a society and relating to our environment, but also how much work we still have to do, how much work we still have to put in, and especially for our plants. So I just wanted to quick share a quote I came across just last week when I was doing some research for a totally separate topic. But this is from the book Being Dakota by Alison Skinner and Amos Enos One-Road, a direct ancestor of mine from Sisseton. The quote is, "Thus it has come about that everything Wakan, mysterious or powerful, to the Indian that he does not understand. He sings certain songs for different species of plants and herbs, approaching them and covering them with white and red birds down before he takes up the plant or herb that he wants to use for any given purpose. The plants and herbs appear like human beings to the Indian." And so I wanted to include this quote kind of just to summarize a lot of things that Galen and Jordan mentioned too. plants are wakan to us. A lot of them are powerful. They have gifts to share. Some of them we don't fully, as human beings, understand the wide variety of plants in the world and even in our own backyards. We really do think of them as their own beings. They live unique lives and have their own will. They can choose whether they want to share their medicines with us or not. And also this quote highlights too that the offerings that we are expected to give plants. The Dakota Oyate and a lot of indigenous nations too live by this value of reciprocity. You're supposed to give as much as you take, and you're supposed to give back if you're expecting, especially if you're collecting things for medicinal use. You're supposed to give something. So that could mean putting down your chashasha, your tobacco, but it could mean in this particular instance, white or red birds down. So there were very specific protocols for very specific plants and ceremonies. Sometimes plants required different offerings. That's how specific our teachings were. And also, I like that this quote talks about songs. I've heard that there are different songs for harvesting different plants too, and I don't know any, but that's something I'd like to learn more. Just a quick kind of personal anecdote. Last year, I did harvest yarrow,
Are you there?
which is like a first aid medicine.
Yes.
Oh, I think someone's not muted. But yarrow is like a traditional first aid medicine, and I had a wound, and I harvested this relative and put my chashasha down, but it didn't work for me. And my first thought wasn't that, oh, this plant just doesn't work. It was that, oh, I have to build my relationship with this plant. Next time I have to, I realized I didn't ask the plant exactly before I took it. And that's something that you should always do. You should take a moment and ask and just sit and listen if it's ready to share its gifts or not. So that's what I learned. I'm still really new to harvesting and learning about our plant relatives, but yeah, it's just something I learned last summer, and something I really like that this quote encapsulates all those different kind of teachings. Oh, I'm missing a slide. Well, I wanted to just take a moment to talk about climate change. It's something that's just kind of always in the back of all of our minds. It specifically this year, and I mean every year, brings seasonal changes. So we see our seasons shifting a little bit. The Dakota year, the Dakota calendar begins when the thunders return, the Wakia Ahadi, when they come back. I grew up hearing that my grandpa would say it takes a good thunderstorm for the plants to bloom. And I mentioned that in front of a biology teacher once, and he was like, he was right. There's this study that says something about the molecules. I don't know, but it really warmed my heart that that's a teaching that we have within the Dakota Oyate, and so that's the beginning of our year. That's the beginning of springtime. But this year we had a thunderstorm in December, which was really out of the ordinary. So thunderstorms can happen at any point of the year, but it's really rare for a thunderstorm to happen when there's still snow on the ground. And so we had internal conversations at LPCP of how would that affect our harvest of chanshasha this year, because if scientifically we know that the thunders coming affects like the movement of medicines within plants, how would that affect our harvest of chanshasha? And so it's just something that we always kind of have to think about, I guess. The other thing with climate change too, and the season shifting, many of our months, our names for our months in the calendar year might also shift. So the way we marked, for example, Wojupiwi or planting moon, May and June, or Wajushta Chashawi, strawberry ripening moon in oh, now I'm mixing them up, June or July. Wajushta Chashawi, June. We might see some of these relatives starting to bloom and ripen earlier or later. So last year, everything came up weeks earlier than we were expecting. And again, just internally, when we were trying to go give plant walks and stuff and plan around what we expected to be around that at that particular moment, some of the plants we expected to see had already bloomed and gone. And unfortunately, so that's something that we'll also have to consider with climate change. And also long-term, which plants will continue to grow here and which won't. So we know that the climate in Minnesota is going to be, we're going to have these greater swings and between, you know, droughts like we had last year. And then a couple years ago, we had floods. And so it's kind of it'll be more of a challenge to determine which plants will continue to have in this particular environment and set of conditions. But with that, it'll mean our plants, even things such as keeping a garden, are going to require us being ever more vigilant and more, just more aware of the needs of our plant relatives that we are either caring for directly or even the ones that are growing in more wild spaces. So I did just want to talk about that briefly. Climate change, it's something that we all have to think about. It's starting to affect us right now, right, you know, in our lives. So it's something that we have to work towards becoming more resilient, I guess, and also transitioning to renewable energies. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the challenges of urban harvesting. So this is a topic that I could spend a long time talking about, but I'm going to try to just kind of summarize. Unfortunately, a lot of regulations are put in place to prevent overharvesting, which is understandable, especially in a place where there is just a lot of people. One person could potentially, you know, harvest something for their own use, but when tens and tens and tens of people do it, you can suddenly start to lose out on certain plant relatives, the diversity that we have. But a lot of these regulations inadvertently prohibit Indigenous people from practicing and connecting with plants that our ancestors have used from time immemorial, and also doing so in a sustainable way. We've talked about too, like, one, not harvesting until you've asked a plant for permission, but also a lot of tribes have different protocols as far as how much you harvest. So I've heard one rule, if anyone knows or has gone on a plant walk with Hope Flanagan, she says to count 13 and pick one. And I've heard similar protocols in other tribes too of, you know, you only are supposed to take what you need. I know for gathering sage too, you don't take the biggest plant that you find, because that in a lot of ways is like the mother plant. That's the one that'll go to seed and support the other sage around it. You don't want to take the biggest one, and I think that's sometimes in like I feel like American society culture, it's like take the biggest and take the most. Something we kind of all like grow up with in the dominant culture, but that's the exact opposite of the thinking that we want to have as far as harvesting. So a lot of these rules and regulations of where you can and cannot harvest lead to a patchwork, and this ultimately discourages harvest overall. For example, in St. Paul, people ask us a lot, especially at Wakanti B2, we're doing all of this restoration work. We're bringing so many native plants back to the space. People ask us if we can harvest them, and the answer is no. You might have noticed I didn't say where I harvested yarrow. I'm not going to tell anybody. Don't want to get in trouble. But as far as harvesting at Wakanti B, it is against the rules. The St. Paul Parks and Recreation rules and regulations for wildlife and environmental protection say that the intentional removal of any natural resource within the park system without prior written permission from the director is not allowed. So that includes plants, trees, shrubs, flowers, and anything else in the environment. This also includes the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. So a lot of people don't know that we've, for a lot of miles of this stretch of the Mississippi that the Twin Cities is in, is a national park. Some national parks you're allowed to forage wild mushrooms and plants, but this is not one of them. They also have a ban on harvesting. And as far as state parks go, it is allowed in some state parks to forage for mushrooms and fruits, but not plants. But in the Twin Cities area, that would really only include Fort Snelling. So you can harvest at Fort Snelling State Park, fruits and mushrooms. And apparently you used to be able to harvest up to a gallon of berries, nuts, and mushrooms from the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge, but they no longer have that rule. So they no longer support foraging and harvesting. I think it's also important to note, you cannot tap maple trees. So this is another of our traditional practices that our Dakota ancestors would have done in the city, but that's not something we can do. So if you are to do any of these activities, there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. You have to get written permission from a director. You have to get permits. And unfortunately, for Indigenous people specifically, it can disconnect us from our environments and from our traditional ways of being, which can be harmful and hurtful in a lot of ways. I mean, these are practices I didn't get to grow up with. Only as an adult seeking them out specifically have I been able to participate in these. But it's something I think about as far as our future generations go. We want to pass on these teachings. And so it's important to bring these back in a lot of ways. But one point of hope, I guess, is that Minneapolis is moving in the right direction. In 2017, they amended rules to allow the harvest of certain fruits and nuts from specific parklands within the city. So there's a map here showing specifically which parks you can't harvest in, but the ones that aren't marked, you can harvest in. And they allow for the harvest of specific fruits and nuts that grow in the parks. So I think this is something that we could work towards in St. Paul. And I just want to put it out there for anybody that's inclined to get it started. I don't know, maybe I'll do it later. So I also lastly just wanted to end on this quote I saw just a couple weeks ago from Yazzie the chef and Neftali Duran, who are both Indigenous chefs and restaurateurs. But they put a public service announcement out there. Before you forage for yourself, or especially as a business, ask yourself if the local Indigenous people whose land you might be a guest have access to land and foraging. Are you taking anything that is sacred or culturally important to Indigenous communities? Yes, we all should have access to the outdoors, but there's no justice until we prioritize the needs and voices of sovereign Indigenous nations. Year after year, we see the uplifting of non-Indigenous voices in these spaces, assuming that everyone that is foraging is thinking about sustainability of the plants. Indigenous teachings emphasize having a relationship with plant relatives. We don't own the environment, normalize unlearning colonial mentality that leads to overexploiting the land. So I just wanted to share that, and thank our audience for coming tonight and listening in on some of these lessons, and ultimately, especially our non-native audience, we want to share these teachings. I feel like too, in society, we're supposed to move really quickly, and especially in a city, everything moves so fast. But when it comes to our plants, it really is about taking time to build these relationships out, taking a moment before you pick something, to think about what you're doing, to think about how that affects plants. That's really at the core of these teachings and why we came together tonight. And I'm missing the Q&A slide, but I think we definitely have time for a Q&A.
We do have some questions coming in from our Facebook Live that I would love to ask Galen and Jordan, and also say Wogudatanka to Keeli for sharing those. I know, they're in the city that we're in St. Paul and Minneapolis, there are so many rules and regulations that have been put in place by these colonial institutions that we live under here in the city. But being with our plants, our medicines, and our foods is our birthright. And that's why we are so excited that we get to continue to have these conversations and uplift the power that our plants and our foods and medicines have. One question that we would love to ask the both of you is, what is the first thing someone should do if they want to start working with plants? What would you recommend that first step look like?
Well, the first step that you should really look at is beginning to study the plant, going to the plant and praying with it, and ask permission if you could use it, and then you have to be with it, watch it as it grows through every season, because there might be a time where, in the spring, as you begin to watch it grow, there might be a time where you might have to pick it or dig it in the springtime. So you need to know what it looks like. And same for as in the summertime, go and be with it and take care of it and pray with it, and over the summer, and take pictures of it. And then the fall, even go and do that. And there was the term that the Europeans, as they begin to move across the prairie lands, way back when, in our ancestor days, they would see Indian people, out on the prairies in the fall, and they called it Indian summer, and it was always after the first frost. And so when that first frost happens, then all the nutrients then of all plants then come back in, and they go and centralize everything back into the root system or the stem system of the plants. And then that's when they begin to do their change. So you might want to be with them and pray with them, and during that time, and then even in the wintertime, put a stick up where or some kind of marking where that plant is at, and go and look at it even in the wintertime. Again, you might have to dig these plants at different times, and if you don't have it, you'll know what it looks like. And so that is my suggestion. And again, for me, whenever I go and utilize medicines, medicinal plants, I always fast with them, or the plant itself will come to me while I'm fasting, and then I get the right to utilize that plant. So these are teachings that I've learned and have grown with, and so I could offer that much.
Oh, Lupita, when you were talking about that, it reminded me of one thing that I had to learn when, especially growing up here in the city, when I started to learn more teachings and learn about all the gifts of these different plants, was that it's really important to learn about the environment that they're growing in. So at Wakantipi, we are so close to the railroad, and it's, last week, Keely mentioned that we were on a walk with an elder here in the community. And one of our biggest questions that we have all the time is about harvesting in urban areas where we know there might be pollution happening. So at Walkantipi, for example, we don't recommend that people harvest there because we are so close to the railroad and we're very close to the highway, as well as a nearby airport, that we're worried about some of the fuels that they use might be leaking lead or arsenic into the soil and into the plants. So it's really important that as we return to our medicines, that we're also being aware of the places that they're growing in, and if there might be those major pollutants there. But one thing that Hope Flanagan shared with us just last week, as I asked that question to her as well, we were at this local park, and I asked if she's ever worried about that, about pollution and runoff in the water. And, she recommended just definitely stay away from railroads and things like that. But it's almost sort of a pick your poison type of thing too, because if we go into our grocery stores, there are so many pesticides and herbicides that are all over our fruits and veggies, or the amount of processed foods and sugars that we ingest daily, and to not be scared about going into the woods and having those relationships with these plants and foods, because they will make us healthy. And those relationships are important. So as long as we keep that in mind, and it's also really easy to be scared. Western society has done a really great job at stripping us humans from the environment and from nature. And so there's a lot of fear that I think a lot of us have when we go harvest or forage. But those teachings from our elders to not be scared, and to not question our plants and our foods as much as we don't question the foods that we get from the grocery store, but a lot of us question our plants and the foods that we find outside. Keely also had a few more questions. Keely, do you want to pull those up?
Sure, yeah. That also reminded me, it stuck with me too, that Hope said, eat the wild ones, they are your spirit. So I think it's good to have some wild foods in your diet. I think one question we had was, what are some of the challenges, Galen and Jordan, that you've come across when working with plant relatives, and how did you move past these? They might be different than, of course, us living in the city here.
Can you repeat that?
What kind of challenges have you come across when working with plant relatives, and how did you move past these?
Oh, okay. For me, on the reservation that I live on is a checkerboard reservation. And so we don't own all the land within our reservation. And so sometimes, when I'm going to gather, and I know that it's not a native land, I'll still go and maybe find the person that owns the land or whatever, and ask if I could harvest some things. Otherwise, for the most part, I depend on the treaty. My tribe, the Hunknwa, uh, uh, we signed a treaty in 1851. And I think everybody is familiar with the 1851 treaty and its territory, and that allows us to gather and hunt, within the original boundaries of that treaty, and that consists of what is it, seven states and or 9 states and seven what do they call them up in Canada? Provinces. Yeah, provinces, and so I often utilize that as backup for myself, when I'm gathering, and so there was a few times that people, non-natives, would say, "Hey, get off of my land," and then all I say is, "Are you familiar with the 1851 treaty?" What? And then I was like, that allows me to gather within the original boundaries of that treaty, and then they'll call the cops. One time the cops were even called, and then I told them, I said, "Hey, I have every right to gather according to the 51 treaty," and then they kind of left me alone. But I don't think that would always work, but it does play favor, with a person that understands, the treaties. And then there was also a lady that asked about replanting. I just want to touch on that real quick. Julia Helen Rice. She asked, I want to ask if there are any teachings or wisdom you can share about planting new plants. What have you learned about sharing new plants and helping them grow in places where they haven't lived in a long time? Okay, with that, what I know about medicines, about plants, they'll move. And I heard the relatives talk about gathering plants in a polluted area. Well, if you go there and pray enough, and you put down the tobacco and are truly sincere, and you talk to them plants, they'll actually move, and they'll go to a new place where you can gather and harvest them. And so I have seen this, I have experienced this, and so I've had trouble trying to replant because maybe a medicine doesn't want to grow in a certain area. So there again, I'll just say a prayer and ask them to help us, and they'll come back. Or if you go through and burn an area, medicines will come back. Because a lot of times, the natural prairie plants need a burning. And so if you go and burn an area, a lot of times then plants will return too. So I've never had a positive with trying to replant indigenous plants. But I did pray, and then they would move and come to a new place. And I'd be like, holy, they never grew here before. And so I've experienced that and seen that happen.
To add to the first question about I just wanted to add something like, so this December I had COVID, and I was away from home. I was in the cities away, or so I was like kind of nervous because I was like, man, what if I get really sick? And my mom's like, the medicines. So I'm like, yeah, you're right. And it was in winter, and we were actually in the Green Bay area, Green Bay, Wisconsin. And, that's where my other half is from. And so I'm a little bit, familiar with the area. And like my dad was saying, it's really important to know these medicines in all 4 seasons. And so I went and I knew where these medicines grew there, and I was able to harvest the medicines I needed. And I got through COVID, but like I harvest flat cedar, pine needle, and mullein, because mullein will grow year round. It's not seasonal. It'll just like change throughout the year. Like mullein will grow close to the ground. And there was no snow, so I was fortunate enough I was able to find mullein and harvest that. So I was really thankful for the teachings, that my dad has taught me, and to be aware and know what these look like in the different seasons. And I was very appreciative. Like I know the protocols and stuff that I was able to get through COVID without having to go to the hospital or anything. So if you truly believe and pray and stuff like that, these medicines will take care of you no matter what, no matter where you are. And so I just wanted to add that to that. So
thank you for sharing that. I think we talk about like reclamation all the time, just like as Indigenous people, but you guys sharing about the Dakota, Yapi, Pejuta, and also praying for plants to come back. That's like really reassuring and hopeful for me, especially as I continue to learn the language, as we continue to do restoration work and bringing plants back to different spaces. It's really, just really reassuring to hear about those.
And I know you were asking about different songs for medicines and stuff. I personally don't know songs for like picking medicines or nothing, but I do know a song that you sing when you're using medicines, and that it helps tell the medicine what it needs to do. So I do know one song, but not to harvest.
Whenever you're praying with medicines, you could always sing a prayer song, and talk to the medicines and ask them to give you the understanding and the help that is necessary to help with the healing. We have medicines to heal every illness that's here on Turtle Island. I remember way back when HIV or AIDS became really prevalent, and at that time, there was a plant that came for me to help people with that illness. But since that time, that plant doesn't grow around here, and so I would have to visit with my adopted sister to find that plant. But the point being is that there are medicines out there to heal every sickness that we have. They're not treatments like modern medicine. They are actually cures. you know, and you know, when this pandemic had hit, you know, there was a big scare out there, and even for us, you know, because it was something new, but the Spirit guided us in a sense in order to help us to continue on, survive, and so I'm thankful for our ceremonies. I'm thankful for you know, all the medicines that I have learned about. You know, there's 405 medicines that grow here on Turtle Island, and I don't know all 405, but this is something that I have learned, that there are 405 medicines that grow on Turtle Island. And so, you know, amongst those 405 medicines, you know, there's going to be a cure for every sickness that comes across our paths, you know, and if somebody comes with the illness that I don't know about or don't have an understanding about, I'll guide them into a direction and to another spiritual person to help them that might have a medicine to help them, you know, just like our ancestors, you know, they said long ago that there was amongst the Sioux Nation or the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota peoples, that there was only 7 or 8 medicine peoples, and each one specialized in a illness. And if one couldn't help, he would refer them on to another, you know. And so, you know, I kind of held on to that teaching that I learned. And, you know, if I can't help somebody, I'll tell them, you know, and I'll guide them in a direction of somebody that might be able to help them, because we're supposed to work together, you know, as medicine peoples or spiritual peoples, you know, and for the well-being and health of all of our peoples, you know, mentally, spiritually, physically, and emotionally. So I just want to express that, and again, you know, say thank you.
Wopira Tanka, thank you so much, Jordan and Galen, for all of your teachings and just your presence here tonight. I hope that if you're ever in the cities, that we can take you to Wakantipi and show you around. So let us know if you're ever around town. And I know I learned so much, and everyone in the comments is saying thank you here on Zoom and on Facebook. Yeah, I'm just going to put one more time in the chat our Clean and Green Earth Month campaign. If you're in the area, come out on Saturday if the weather permits and help us clean up Wakantipi. And you can also donate or contribute to our Clean and Green Earth Month campaign so that we can continue to bring in elders and knowledge keepers and share these teachings with everyone. Yeah, okay, so thank you so much again, everyone, and Dokstake. I hope to see you all soon.
Doksha.
Yeah.
Doksha ke.
Yeah. Doksha, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miigwech.
Ho.
Oh, yay! Bye bye.
Thank you.
Wopida, Chidamaye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Glad you did this. I even paid attention. I can start my chart.
Igama Yayedo Dokshake.
Oh.
Nilo washed